Can y'all hear me?
Whenever you're ready.
All right.
Whenever you're ready, go for it.
Cool. Awesome. All right, I guess we official now. Are we ready? Well, one, I want to just say how excited I am to be in space with all of you. When I was thinking about the time that we're going to spend together right now, the first thing that came to mind was just how all of us have that student-parent experience, or we're, in that case for me, was a son of a student-parent. So I remember growing up in the back of the classroom with my mom, doing my homework, playing really Game Boy or doing something while she was out there learning. So I wanted to kick it off actually to kind of, instead of usually flipping and asking the question around your student-parent experience, I'd love to know about what was your kids' experience while you were in college? So, what comes to mind with you and Lyric? What comes to mind with Lynn and Everly? Like, how was that experience, being in college, and even too, maybe now that they're older and thinking about college, sort of what is their experience too that comes to mind for them? So, you laugh, so I'm not start with you.
I'm trying to look away, but okay. Yeah, I laugh because that's I don't think anybody's ever asked me her experience. That's really kind of cool. Her experience was she was the boss of the class. So when I was a student parent, I would bring her to class with me, and some of my professors would be like, oh, we have a helper. And so she would be the one to hand out papers. So they really tried to make her feel as comfortable as possible for said classes where I could bring her in. And then as I progressed to grad school with her, I couldn't bring the kid to class. So she became the quasi-director of graduate studies and research in the Office of Graduate Studies and Research, because she was sitting in the office with Mrs. Green. And if Mrs. Green needed her to file something or to run this down the hall somewhere, and she's like that high, and she knows where everything is on the campus, and she could get there and back. And she was even selling Girl Scout cookies and wasn't even a Girl Scout yet. So it was like, and sometimes I would come to the office like, where's my kid? And they're, oh, she's running an errand for Mrs. Green. Excuse me? So I think she learned a sense of leadership in that, and just being whoever she wanted to be, because she got the opportunity to help someone older and take charge. And I think it's helped her a lot with college, because someone said on the panel earlier, but she said, I've been in college my whole life. And so she knew the expectation when she reached teenagehood of where we're going next.
That was Everly that said that. Well, she has a very unique experience to college because my water broke with her in my 8 a.m. math class. I left the class, came back to finish my 2:30 before.
Wait, how you do that?
I went home and I changed. No, not yet. I had her that night. But it was the last day before spring break, and it was my last semester to get my degree, and there was nothing that was going to stop me from that cross. But funny, now we talk about, what she's going to study when she goes to college. She's like, I already went to college. I'm like, no, you went to preschool on college campus. But that's been the experience, right? Because not only did my oldest daughter, Lennon, and I start college together, she was 2.5, and she went to the on-campus child care center, and then I went to a child development class to just learn how to be a good mom, actually. That's how I started college. I didn't have a major declared. I just thought, I want to learn how to be a good mom. They attended that at Los Angeles Valley College Family Resource Center and the Child Development Center from the time that they were both 2.5 until they were 12. They went to after-school childcare, too. That was open till 10 p.m., so I could take night classes at Cal State Northridge. So, they really grew up on college campus. But it is a really good question, David, and one thing that I haven't gotten a lot of opportunity to say, and I would challenge the field to think about this more, is 1 year during the Student Parent Success Symposium hosted by Ohio State University, they decided to take the show on the road to Portland State University, which has a pretty robust student parent program. And in the call to action and for proposals, they had a panel of children of student parents. And Lennon applied and submitted a video and was on this panel. And when I tell you I cried, she said, seeing my mom study and work so hard made me really want to study and work so hard. And I didn't ask her questions on my homework because like I wanted to figure it out the way she figured it out. And I was like, all those missed dinners, all those late nights, all the time learning how to be a good mom away from my kids in classes was worth it because you lead by example.
If I can jump in, I just both of your stories really resonate for me. My daughter's a little older, she's 26 now, and she's just started yesterday actually her second semester as a tenure track English faculty at LA Harbor. So at LA Harbor College, I should say. And so I think of the generational impact that it has on our families, right? It's not just us going to college, right? But it's the generations that are changed by us going to college. And so for my daughter living on campus, having those experiences, when I've asked her, I said, you know, how did it impact you? She just said, you know, it gave me a comfortability, a belief in herself, because as you mentioned, we're modeling that behavior. The exposure to being on a college campus is there. And I think it really helps increase their own aspirations. So I'm really grateful for both of you sharing that, but then just also kind of sharing what I've seen my daughter being able to express.
Congratulations, she's in the business.
So that's my joke. I say, you know, people ask me, what is your daughter do? I'm like, oh, she's in the family business. And they'd be like, you're a college president? I'm like, oh, she's a community college faculty member. It's the joke.
So would you say then that it was worth the sacrifice, or has been worth the sacrifice for our current student parents in terms of going back to school and getting their credential? You know, what sort of emotions has it brought for you, but also for your family too, in opting to go back and get that credential?
So I'll just jump in real quick. Yes, 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 and yes. Like I get emotional when I talk about this, but and for the students, I think it's so important. Like there is no word to describe when you see your child self-actualize. It's like an incredible feeling, like I'm seeing my daughter now enter the profession, and she got her first tenure track professorship, and she's living in her own apartment, and daddy's not having to, you know, come in, and you almost feel kind of useless as a parent, to be honest with you. It's like you're like getting yourself out of a parenting job, because you're like, you needed me all these years and now you're on your own.
Can't wait for that.
Oh, you're gonna miss it, trust me, because the other day she was like, Dad, I need help making pozole for my department meeting for the holidays. And I was like, I'll stay up till midnight and make pozole with you. I'm like, my daughter needs me. Like, it felt good to feel needed again. But all kidding aside, you know, it's such a great feeling when you see them self-actualize. And how do I say this? Like for me, you know, we stand on the shoulders of our ancestors, right? And so every generation is trying to make it a little bit better for the next generation. And when you see your kid leaning in and just in their full light, priceless, priceless.
I'm thinking about the fact that I'm having empathy for parents of high school seniors or high school students trying to enroll in dual enrollment or attend community college, that they themselves didn't have that experience, this first generation, because the system is so complicated. And so like thinking back and looking to the two of you, like the struggles that you're going through now of like, what office do you go to? Who do you talk to? The stress that you're enduring is you are harboring that for your child. Like they're not gonna have to experience that. You're gonna be much more equipped to help them and support them when they get there. Because it feels daunting, and it feels like all the work that you do when you're in it is never gonna end. And so I wanna know from you, you got a 3-year-old, you're at the beginning.
Yes, I am. He definitely drives me crazy sometimes, but it's definitely been a good experience. I mean, going to classes, like I feel like every other month I'm like, do I still wanna keep doing this? It's just a lot sometimes, but I feel like when I look and, you know, I think about the future and like, you know, being able to provide for him and be there for him, it just makes me feel like, you know, like it is all worth it. Because, you know, my mom and my dad, they didn't go to college, didn't even finish high school. Out of all my siblings, I would be the first one to graduate. So it just makes me feel so good that, you know, like I don't want to have to struggle like my mom did with us. I want to be able to, you know, give him everything that he wants, like everything that he needs. I want to be able to provide that for him. And I feel like graduating, getting my degree is like a step into like, you know, opening like better doors and higher doors for me to be able to, you know, do better for us as a family.
And don't be shy. In May, what's happening?
In May, I'm graduating with my associates.
All right.
You both are graduating.
Thank you.
Matt, when you were, making your decision to go back to school, kind of what were you reflecting on? What sort of challenged you in making that?
I think for me especially, I kind of went the opposite in some ways. I was thinking how much more time I was going to get with my kids. I was in the military, I was in the Army prior, so.
Thank you for your service.
Oh, you're welcome. So I got out and I was like, what am I going to do? I have a son, he's 7, and a 2-year-old little girl. And I transitioned out of the Army right as soon as COVID hit. So my daughter was born during COVID. They're just not too long after. And me and my wife were like, do I go back to work? Should I go to school? Should I stay home? Like, what should we do? And I was like, well, I would really love to go get my degree because my sister's the first one in my family to get a degree. And then my wife, she's got hers now. She just started graduate school. She's going to get her MBA. It's good though. And I think I was like, well, if I go to school, I can stay at home, get some time back that I didn't get the 13 years prior with my son as much. And we have integrated them into the school in about every aspect you can. Like my son, he goes to baseball camp with Sac State. He goes to other camps there. My daughter, she's in the child care, but it's more of a preschool. It's more than child care. I mean, my daughter was born during COVID and she's been at home with me and my wife since then, and then she'll be 3 next month. And last semester was the first real interaction with kids her own age, and she has blossomed, I think, in that way. And I just think our kids seeing us go, I'm 35 years old, that it's not too late, or there's never a right time, I think, to do things. Sometimes you just have to say, hey, I'm going to get this done, I'm going to do it. Whether there is time, there's always going to be a lack of time, there's always going to be a lack of money, there's always going to be a lack of something, and either you decide that you're going to do it or you don't. But I think it's huge for kids to see their parents doing those kind of things that they can. And I don't know, I've enjoyed it though, going back to school.
I think just hearing your stories, I think a lot of things come to mind for me is just the general misconceptions that exist around just college students in general, but even also the student parent story too. I think people assume or presume there's one type of student parent, but there's so many different archetypes and connections that student parents have, relationships. And so I guess just thinking about that question or thought, what are some of the misconceptions that we're constantly battling in this space in terms of who student parents are and the assumptions that we have around this population?
I will go. I want to go back to your question around is it worth it and the sacrifices, and I'll speak to that. But I think, my life is completely different because of my college degree and my education. And when I found out I had been accepted into William & Mary, I was 8 months pregnant and I was living day to day in a Motel 6. And so when I think about what life was like when I walked across that graduation stage, it was completely different. And all of the late nights, all of the times where my daughter was like, why can't you take me to the park? And I'm tired of your head in that book. And all of that was worth it because our lives were completely different. It just totally changed my life. I think the biggest misconception that I see around student parents is that they don't exist, that they're a very small, niche population, that you won't find them on most college campuses. And then I think the second part of that is that they don't belong there, that if you do find them there, it's really not a space for them. And instead of institutions and policymakers and just folks figuring out how do we make sure these are spaces that are accommodating to student parents, it's more about how does that student parent need to fit conform, contort, to be able to navigate the systems that we've created that make it incredibly hard, for them to be successful. So I think that's the biggest thing. I will sit across from people who work in higher education every day, and I'll tell them 1 in 5 college students is parenting, and their jaws drop on the floor. These are people who are working day to day in education, in higher education, and It's just such an invisible population, a population that's been allowed to be under the radar for far too long.
I want to add to that. I remember when my grandmother found out I was pregnant. And my mom called and told me, because I remember I called my mom and said, okay, hey, I'm pregnant, but I didn't want to tell her until I had figured everything out, everything that I could figure out. So getting on all the social services, all the things, right? My mama's from, Georgia, so I didn't want her to say, you're gonna come back home. Because I didn't want to be a point of shame for her. As I left college early, I said I was gonna do all these things, and then here I am pregnant. And it was interesting because when I called her and said, hey, Ma, I want you to know that I'm pregnant, but I did everything's in order, and she said, I already knew you were pregnant, I was just waiting for you to call me. I don't know how.
Wow.
But mothers know, right?
Because you hadn't called her in a few days while you were doing the other stuff.
Right? I hadn't called her in a couple months.
She's
maybe,
got to be
so
pregnant.
She knew, right? What is it? But she told me that she ended up telling my grandmother, and she said my grandmother just cried because she felt like I was going to be a failure now that I had a kid. And I think when we talk about the archetype of student parents, I really believe that we still have that feeling. Then when you talk about no belonging, you don't belong here, it's because we feel like that they're failures for some reason, when actually they're the brightest minds on our campuses. They can teach us things, they're teaching their kids things, and so it's still that misconception that's out there. And now when my grandmother looks at me, she always says, girl, I didn't think you was gonna make it. Look at you now. But,
College president.
right?
Yeah.
So and I didn't even think that would happen.
Totally,
but
right.
it's when we give people a chance.
Yes.
Right, it is all it takes. And never forget like where you started, and we all make mistakes, but really, is it a mistake? You have this beautiful soul that you've created.
It's not a mistake.
It's not a mistake.
Never.
So how do we just help people see that?
Change the paradigm.
Yeah, change the paradigm.
That rather than our children being barriers, that there are motivators, right? You were saying the brightest minds, the saying, if you want something done, ask a parent. If you want something done right, ask a single parent. The ability to juggle and to show up and to strive and lead really as the motivator, not as the stigma of like the negativity and the sense of belonging. And I think that that's still a huge mindset shift that needs to happen on campus culture.
I think speaking of campus culture too, I think you said something that really resonated with me, and just how our systems are so archaic and just not designed in a way to support, most of them, some of them are, but most of them are not designed in a way to support student parents. And I think that's where we have to hold ourselves accountable to really pushing the system. I know when I reflect on my own campus, and I've shared this, and it's not to speak negative of it, but when I first arrived, there was signs across campus that had a clip art of a stroller with a bar through it, like, don't bring your kids. And I think just 5 years ago, that was the attitude of the institution. And to see, that you can make change through redesigning policies, procedures, having intentional conversations, elevating student parent voices like yourselves. I think that's why we talked about Dr. Luke Wood and having an advocate at Sac State. Like, make sure he understands that parent-student experience, so it gets elevated. So it's not, like you said, we destigmatize it. It's not a perspective that is an added-on perspective, but it's central to the conversations we're having about culture and climate and belonging on our campuses. Absolutely. Because if we design the system to support student parents, all students are going to benefit from that culture change.
I'm thinking, I've said this before, actually, I think I was with you, Nicole, at an Ascend event at the Aspen Institute, that, when the ADA Act passed in 1991, like the uproar of the curb cuts that were gonna drive away business, and the unintended benefits that came about for the influx of strollers down New York City streets and bicyclists, and all of a sudden these businesses started seeing all this business, and it was the unintended trickle-down benefits for doing this for a population of a large portion of Americans that needed a policy in place to advocate for them, the American Disabilities Act. And I think a lot about the intersectionality of our student parents. They are women and men of color, they are formerly incarcerated, they are veterans, they are students with disabilities. 1 in 5, and the intersection, when we think about college campuses today having Black scholars and veteran centers, is like, when are we going to have a student parent center? And not that, it's not like, oh, because you have it, we deserve, there's enough pie to go around.
Yeah.
And breaking down those silos is another stigma, not to the parent, but to the institutions, because there's, it's the same student.
Dr. Muñoz got me thinking about just the trajectory of the people around the table. So in terms of being enrolled in college, a couple years ago versus I didn't say decades, and being enrolled in college today. So I'm interested in, from your perceptions and all the different vantage points you have, for those who were enrolled in college years ago, did you share with your faculty or professors or advisors that you had children, or did they know that? What were the perceptions then? And also, I'd love to think about today in terms of the systems you're trying to change for those who have power within those systems, but also those who are currently in the system. How's it been, presenting and being like, I am a parent, I'm looking for those resources, just interested in sort of that trajectory over time and your perspective around that sense of belonging and change.
So I'm going to jump in on that, and I'm going to give Nicole some props, because my first presidency, I was in Washington State, and I get this phone call from, I think it was Sarah Golder-Grab, who said, hey, we're doing this policy summit thing in DC, and all I heard was DC, and I was like, yes. But then when I got there and was reading over the materials, they wanted to know about my experience, as a student parent. And I was very reluctant, I think, to say something about it. And it wasn't until we sat on that panel in DC that I found power in my own voice to share that story so that people understood. Because I think sometimes we get into this mode where we get all our degrees and we become whatever, and then we automatically forget or don't want to tell anyone because we don't want to look like a certain thing. And from that moment, I was like, this is an unintended platform that I didn't think would matter in this space, and it absolutely does. And so from that moment in 2019, and not like I hadn't shared my story before, but it is literally something that, and I go into every meeting, I say, don't forget that I am a faculty member, and don't forget that I was a student parent who had student loans and all the things too, and these are the same things that our students struggle with. So, at my institution, I agree with you, and it's not saying anything negative, but we still have policies on the books that says children aren't allowed on campus. Now, do I think that they need to be in a biology lab dissecting eyeballs and stuff? Probably not. But it's a very nonsensical approach, especially for higher ed when we're saying we need more enrollment. You need butts and seeds. So don't you want to get the babies exposed now? Even if they don't come to my institution, they know they can go somewhere. And and that's the mind frame that I'm trying to change on our campus. And I'll tell this really quick story, but we had a student, a little something, and I'm gonna call him Bobby, little guy. And he came to campus with his mom, and she ran out of funding for childcare, so it was after hours. She's in this class. Little Johnny's sitting in the middle of the hallway. He sees this bright red phone that's calling his name. Oh, no. He goes and picks up that bright red phone 20 times until security comes. Security comes and he's sitting there like studious. I didn't touch that phone. We know you touched it, little Bobby. But the sad part about it was they penalized the parent. So when she had to come out of the classroom, they took her ID, our security staff, they wrote her up, they put her through the student conduct system. And thank God I'm on the emails that saw this, but it was a week later by the time I saw the report come through. And I rarely raise sand on campus, but that day I raised all kind of crap because this is not the environment that we are. Did anybody ask her why she didn't have money to pay for childcare? Did anybody ask her why her kid was there? No, we took her ID as if she was speeding down the road somewhere and asking for insurance cards and things of that nature. So I agree with you, Dr. Muñoz. I think this is more about changing people's perceptions, the culture, the policies. Times are changing. People have sex. Oh my God, I've said that before. Like, why are we so mad about it? Then they bring their kids on campus. Shouldn't we welcome them? Because in a couple more decades, we're going to be looking to say, well, who are going to be our new students? Especially if we're looking at it just from a business perspective. but also from a life perspective of supporting, they can be able to support themselves and prosperity for their families.
I think the approach that you talked about, punitive, is really, as a student parent, what you're kind of balancing every day is when I disclose that I'm a parent, is the response going to be supportive, warm, let's figure this out together, or is it going to be punitive? And I know when I was in college, it could go either way. I had professors who were blown away by the fact that I was a mother and I was a student and I was going to a prestigious school and like, oh my gosh, wow. And then I had some professors who were trying to teach me a lesson and trying to make it more difficult to prove a point. And I remember I had a theater professor. My daughter had walking pneumonia. She was like 1.5, maybe 2. And I had told the professor, hey, she's on meds. It's really a tough time. I don't think I'm going to be able to come to class. And I think there was like a midterm or a final or something going on. And basically she told me, if you don't come to class, I don't care if it's with your daughter or not, you will fail the class. And I will never forget walking across campus in the snow with my daughter with walking pneumonia, holding her, because there was also no parenting spaces, parking spaces, there was no, so I'm like walking across campus in the frigid cold with my baby who has walking pneumonia, get to class, have to have her on my lap, miserable, taking this test, right? And so when you have those experiences, you're reluctant to share with people that you are a parent because you just don't know which way it's going to go. And so I think, today I wish I could say that, oh, that's totally changed. But in reality, it hasn't. The work that we do with colleges and universities all across the country, and it could be 4-year schools, it can be community colleges, most people, you just don't know which way it's going to go. And I think it has a lot to do with the culture shift that needs to happen across higher education, where people start to really think about students as being whole human beings, right? That have a life and interests and obligations outside of the classroom. Your syllabus is not the most important thing in their lives. And I think that culture shift needs to happen across higher education at every kind of institution for parenting students to really feel like disclosing their parenting status is going to be met with support and understanding.
Matt and Abby, I'd love for you to jump in. You're both at institutions that have provide support for student parents. So you alluded a little bit already, Matt, around the way that your kids are already like super integrated. How are you also integrated as a student parent into the campus?
I think for me personally, I've only had positive experiences, but we kind of had a similar roundtable we have a student parent and like family center, like actually on campus. And we kind of in conjunction with everything here, we sat down and had a roundtable, and I had said, I will share if I need to, really. I don't like just jump up and down and say I'm a student parent, but if my daughter's sick, you can't take your child to childcare if they're sick, which is kind of the whole point. You need childcare, but but you don't want to get everybody else sick. Well, I would inform hey, I had a midterm, actually, a similar case. I was like, hey, my daughter is sick. She's got pink eye. I can't come in. They're like, we'll make it up on another day. Just we'll work around your schedule. And it was that easy. But then at the roundtable, and I don't know if maybe it's a father versus mother or men versus women kind of issue, but I think mothers have it a lot worse off, but just from what I've personally heard. I don't know what the stigma is versus a male parent versus a female parent, but there was some of the stories that some of the mothers had were pretty disheartening. And they weren't at Sac State, they were usually in another place prior to that, but saying, hey, my child is sick, I can't come in, I will work it, I will do whatever you need to get done. Like, whatever you need me to get done, I will finish it, I'll figure it out, I'll do independent study, I'll do something to figure it out. Either you're here or you're not, and you receive a 0, and I don't think that's a good culture. And to kind of piggyback off something else, we have a very large, I guess like 1 in 3 students at Sac State are actually student parents, and it shows, I think, but somehow you don't see them. But you wouldn't know. I'll see a kid, like a student, every once in a while, maybe walking around with their child, but you can tell over at the ASI, like our our child care facility, that there's a ton, and they figured it out, but I've had positive.
That's great.
No,
I mean, that's good to see. Hopefully the trajectory is changing, right?
Yes.
How about yourself, Abby? How's your experience been?
I've had a lot of positive experiences too. Like when my son was sick and it was for an English class, the professor also had a son too, so she was very understanding. Like, if I had to turn something in late or I wasn't able to complete it in time, just, dealing with things from him. But then there's also been like other professors who are like not really understanding. Like my son was like really sick, like we were in children's all night because he started throwing up in his sleep. Turns out he had an ear infection. And the medication they gave him was too like harsh on his stomach, so he was throwing up even more. So I explained to my professor, like, I'm not able to like do my exam tonight. Is there any way I can make it up another day this week? And she didn't email me back until like the next day, and she was like, yeah, you can go ahead and do that, but it is gonna be late. So once I turned it in, she took like 20 points off for it being late, and then, minus any other points of questions, like, I didn't do the best on. So it's like, that just kind of messed with my grade just because I had to take care of my son before I was able to do an exam for school. So it's like, I feel like some professors are understanding and some just like, just don't really care, like just do the class or, like.
Almost as if your kid should like look at your syllabus and say, okay, this is the best time to get sick.
Schedule
I'm
that
gonna
breakdown.
catch that pink eye
And we
during
know
spring
how
break.
cooperative
Yes,
children are.
yeah.
The most cooperative
ready.
sort.
And I think she brought up a good point though about if the professor, he or she, has children. I think sometimes I'm 35 years old, so I'm about the same age as a lot of my professors, older or younger. So we have children that are almost the exact same age. They're like, oh, my kid plays soccer. Oh, so does mine.
Yeah.
And those are they're real easy to get along with. But I don't know about some of the ones that maybe either they didn't have children or they have older children and maybe they forgot what it was like to be a parent. Maybe, I don't know.
I often find when I talk to folks that are either they are or they aren't aware is not that they don't want to be, they just didn't know. And so it really starts with the institution of knowing who their students are and then creating and fostering a culture that appreciates that. And I love that so much about Generation Hope with you were ahead of the game in producing and releasing a public syllabi statement for institutions to use to say if you're a parenting student and you need accommodations, Title IX, federal policies that protects parenting and pregnant students, that there's just a lack of awareness, and that when we get to that awareness, like, how could you not want to support these incredible group of students? Yeah. And sorry, Mike, I saw you not wanting to jump in.
I just really wanted to offer a reflection on something Matt said. When I think about my own experience as a single father, I was heroified on my college campus. I remember having a 2-year-old daughter walking around, and everyone was bending over backwards to help me. And I had a friend, a single mom from Compton and a single mom from Santa Ana. And one day we were kind of had like a babysitters network. We were all like taking care of each other's kids. And one day they were kind of, I don't know, I could just feel tension. And I'm like, hey, what's up? Like, what's going on? They're like, we think it's really unfair that, you get all this attention because you're a dad. You get all this extra support. You get invited to the dean's house for dinner, all these things, and no one cares about us. And no one's bending over backwards to help us. People are blaming us when we have to ask for extensions. And it made me really pause and think about my privilege, that I had don't get me wrong, my life was tough, it was hard being a single dad, but the institution looked at me differently than my single mom counterparts. And I think we have to be willing to talk about that too as we're talking about culture and how we structure things because, and again, not to take away from any single parent or parents that are married or whatnot, because it is a challenge. But I think single moms have it extra tough, and I think we need to name that and figure out how to address that.
Well, I think I would just really quickly say, as you were talking about your experience and we were just sharing, I think, one of the things we talk about Generation Hope, and I know a lot of people talk about in the field is student parent work is racial justice work, right? And I think how student parents are treated in various spaces has a lot to do with their various identities, right? And so gender certainly plays into it, and shame and stigma is most often projected on women in this space around, why did you make these decisions? Why did you make these choices? But also we know that this population is disproportionately students of color. And so when you're coming into a financial aid office as a student of color, as a Black mother, a single mother, how are you treated compared to a white student who doesn't have a child, or even a white a father coming into that space, right? And so I think that is also really critical to the culture shift that needs to happen across higher education, is naming these things, right, as being very intertwined with student-parent work, and not being afraid to really talk about them and address them and uproot a lot of the policies, the processes within institutions that perpetuate those things, right? So I think, it's just interesting talking about different experiences. A lot of it is mixed up with your identity and how people perceive you, and the biases that we all have, and making sure as institutions that we are getting those biases in check.
And the stereotypes that have been here for hundreds of years,
Yeah.
that have played into the very experiences.
welfare queen and
yeah,
all these
the welfare
different-
queen
Yes.
and all of that. Men aren't in the home with their kids, so, oh, look, we've got one. Oh, we're gonna shower all of this, but oh, she's just, promiscuous, and oh, it's your fault. So I think all of that plays a part into their experiences.
I got asked here today where my kids were. What are you doing with your kids? I'm like, oh, I just left them in LA. They're fine. like as that.
Oh my gosh. Well, I want to move us to solutions orientation as if we have our remaining time. So what do student parents need to feel that sense of belonging and also be able to thrive? We've kind of already gotten to a little bit of this, but I would love for you to sort of share some ideas and thoughts from your perspectives and your vantage points around what do they need to thrive and to feel that sense of belonging and connection.
We went through orientation, right? And there were all these things for new students, which was great. It's like, hey, this is where we talk about financial aid. This is where we talk about this. This is where we talk about that. Not one thing had anything to do with if you are a student parent or if you are an older, even just an older student. Like in a lot of ways, it was like, if you want to bring your parent and talk about this, why? It's what I'm saying. I am a parent. I need to know like where this office is. I want to know where this is. I want to know where that is. Like, it was even just a simple like, could we tailor a conversation to just, hey, this is where this is. I mean, we eventually went and talked to all the resources that were on campus. We were able to meet with everybody upstairs, but it wasn't specified or easy to find. And there are tons of resources at Sac State for student parents if you know where to look. And they've done a pretty good job of trying to get that out there now, but I could just imagine in some other places that don't even have that basis to start out with. Like, I mean, just a simple, like, if you meet these criteria, this could help. Like, even if it's just a simple little map with a couple of places on it to where to go, exactly like how to orient you from orientation. I mean, even things like that would help, I think, to get you started, like a start point.
I think we need to remember where we came from. That just sticks with me.
Unpack that.
Well, my mom didn't go to college. She graduated from high school, but she was the oldest of 8 kids, and she made it happen. I went to college because she mandated that I went, but I, partied, had myself a good old time. Then I got pregnant, and then life got hard because mom pulled money away and all these things, and then I had to struggle to make it through. And then now, here we are in 2023, I'm a college president with all of these opportunities. Sorry, God, 24. I'm supposed to be 40 this year, so I'm like trying not to get there, right? I'm in denial, but I think we always get into this space where we forget how we started. We forget where that journey really got us to this point, and none of us go the same route. I think you said that, right? There's no perfect time. There's no perfect road. There's zigzags, there are potholes, there are things that'll stop you, that'll delay, but you had to keep on going. If everybody on college campuses, especially our faculty and staff and those who support our students, can remember that, and even fellow students can remember where they started and how they got to from point A to point Z, you might have a better understanding and be a bit more open to student parents and what they desire and what they need so that they can move forward, because everybody had to have somebody to help them to get where they are. I don't care if you were, rich and you had to call your rich uncle to get you your first job, but everybody had to have somebody there to give you a hand up, to support you. And I think that's honestly what I see that we're missing from a humanities sense. We're just getting so polarized where we forget how we started. And if we can all remember that, then how can we support each other to move forward?
I love that you said hand up. It's something I often think about when we talk about the stigma is like when we support student parents, it's not a handout, it's a hand up. And that so many people did have that too. And I'm thinking, David, like when you first asked the question, I can tell you all the ways that you can make like lives easier for students, not easier, but like remove barriers, priority registration, lactation rooms, child-friendly spaces, child-friendly policies, on-campus childcare, financial support, flexible scheduling in classes. But when I really take a step back to think like, okay, what is the goal of all, what's the outcome of that? Or how do we even get to even those things? How do we even get to saying, here's the resources for you because you're a parent, is you need to know who your parents are. And so I think the best way to support student parents is to identify your student parents and not piecemealed through financial aid or through Dreamers and different data where you're pulling it together on an Excel spreadsheet. We are in 2024. That's right. Like we have data systems. Like why are we not asking these questions? Why are student parents not designated as an equity group? Why does federal funding dollars not come to this group? And so I think we just need to start with data. And if we're going to close equity gaps, which is the goal of ECMC Foundation, we need to know what those gaps are.
I also love to identify not just from data, like a quantitative piece, but to Matt's point around the qualitative, like showing them around campus, like making sure that people feel a sense, like you mentioned in Sac State, that there's 1 in 3, but you don't feel that they're present, right? So how do you identify too that they're in the ecosystem, that they're present, not just in the data, but also in culture too, right? So
to your point about in the middle of the pandemic, we actually implemented a pre-registration survey. So before every term a student registers for classes, they answer 2 or 3 questions, and one of them, in addition to housing insecure, formerly incarcerated, we also ask if you're a student parent. And so we can identify every student parent term by term, and we case manage them. And then from there, like you said, you're able to bundle services because students don't know what they don't know. So if you don't know that there is a Boys and Girls Club on campus that will give you free after-school care, how are you going to take advantage of that? If you didn't know that there's a CalWorks office or there's a lactation room or all these different services, you could, I think my biggest gripe with higher education is we'll build all these programs, offices, and centers, and then you walk through them and they're empty. Well, why are they empty? Not because we have students that don't care, it's just they're not informed oftentimes. And so I think to both your points, we have to build systems that are responsive at the student level, not just looking at the aggregate data, term-by-term data at each semester, but really to be able to say, okay, we need to make sure that we connect you from the very beginning with all the resources so you're not waiting till a student's on academic probation or on financial aid warning and trying to intervene. You're setting them up for success at the very beginning of the term, and that requires a paradigm shift.
Yeah. I want to hear what Abigail has to say, and as you collect your thoughts, Abigail, I would just add, completely 100% to everything around the table. The data collection, when people say, well, how do we get started? The first thing we say at Generation Hope is data. Start collecting the data because people can dismiss the paradigm shift that needs to happen because they're like, that's like what, 10 students here out of what, 30,000? So being able to say, actually, it's 1 in 3, and then people are like, oh, right? So you got to have the data. I would also add, I think, a policy environment is really key that also says that this is important work. So an example of that is, we have states that are starting to pass legislation that are requiring higher ed institutions to start collecting the parenting status of their students. And in many cases, that has forced the hands of these institutions, but in a really good way, because it does then allow them to say, okay, now we do know that 30%, 25% of our students are parenting. We actually do need more lactation spaces. We need more case managers. Our advisor to student ratio is completely inadequate, right? So I think that also what we don't talk about as much is the policy environments that are really needed. And in order to create those environments, we have to get policymakers to start to see this population. One of the things that I noticed, and President Biden was doing a State of the Union address, and he was talking about affordable childcare and universal preschool, and he was talking about it in the context of making sure people can go to work. And I was like, say that it's also about student parents and parents being able to go to school. And so in our national dialogue and our national conversations, we're not talking enough about the fact that parents go to college, or there are millions of parents who want to go to college. And so I think another part of this work is also the awareness that we have to build with policymakers, with decision makers, with folks that are responsible for creating the policy conditions that often create urgency for higher ed institutions to start to create the maps and collect the data and have flexible and priority registration, right? That is also a huge part of this that we don't talk about as much, but is really critical.
And what would make you feel a sense of belonging on campus?
I just feel like if more colleges provided programs uniquely for student parents, which is why I also really like HCC, because they have a program where it's only for student parents, and you have early access to registration. They can help you with any outstanding balances of tuition if you're not able to cover it. With textbooks, if they're too expensive, they also can provide that for you. They can provide you for outside resources for childcare, Head Start, and even if you don't have enough for childcare, they can give you a certain amount of money to help cover the cost with that. I just feel like providing a program that is supportive to student parents so that they're not stressing or struggling with things outside of school. The school is able to support them not just with school, but in all aspects of their life.
Thank you. Well, Mike, Nicole, Abby, Daria, Amber, Matt, it's a pleasure being in conversation with you all, and thank you again for your time, and look forward to continuing this work of really ensuring that student parents are being served and effective and identified and feel a sense of belonging, connection to their campuses. So thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Great job, David.
Yeah, David.
Now we can play cards. Uno, please. Uno. That was great.